Morning, Michael Alvarez. I'm a professor at the California Institute of Technology here in Pasadena, California. I'm the co-director of the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project, and I'm also one of the founding co-directors of the Caltech Lind Center for Science, Society, and Policy. Well, it's election season, and since it's election season, we here at Caltech are in the midst of doing in-person election observation and poll watching. And because I'm in the midst of that, I often get questions from people about how we approach it and what the general methodology is that we use when we go out and observe in person the polling places and vote centers, both here in Southern California and elsewhere. I've been doing this for nearly 2 decades, maybe a little bit longer. Visited hundreds of polling places in jurisdictions throughout the United States and internationally. And in general, the sort of following approach is one that I have found to be productive, both for myself in terms of understanding a jurisdiction's approach to implementing in-person voting. I think it's also helpful for students and guests when we have the opportunity to take them to polling places and vote centers. I also think that this general approach is helpful for collecting data and qualitative information about how polling place voting and vote center operations are implemented in a particular jurisdiction. The first principle, which I will reiterate again, is that one of the most important things to remember is that when we are visiting vote centers and polling places, we always need to be respectful and keep in mind that we're guests in the polling place or vote center in the jurisdiction. That means approaching it from a place of respect, remembering that in these locations, people are exercising their franchise and their right to vote. And so again, that means being respectful, being quiet, watching, listening, and most importantly, not in any way trying to intervene or answer questions or do anything that demonstrates that we're anything other than neutral observers in that location. And one of the first things we like to do is to try to find the location of the polling place or vote center. Usually we'll start, say, right here at Caltech on campus. We'll have the street address of a polling place or a voting center. We'll use a GPS device on our phones or devices to get directions. But when we get in the near vicinity, one of the things I always like to do is stop paying attention to those directions and see if I'm approaching this voting location as a voter. Would it be easy for me to find? Are there signs that are located at nearby street corners? Is the signage at the entrance to the location well marked? Are there vote here or other vote signs that indicate that there is a voting location in the area? So one of the first things we're always looking for is to make sure that the location is well marked from the streets and also from nearby major streets. The second thing, and this is particularly important here in Southern California, is to make sure that there's plenty of parking available for voters. Again, in Southern California, this is a particular issue, especially in the more urban areas, but it's also issues which we've encountered in many other parts of the country. It is important that there be reserved parking for voters and that there needs to be plenty of accessible parking in the location as well. This is a problem which we continually see in locations because, again, parking is difficult at the best of times in many places like Southern California, and it is difficult for those who work in these polling places or vote center locations to make sure that there is adequate parking that is reserved for voters. Once you're there in the parking lot or at the entrance to the facility, one of the other things we're looking for is the directional signs to the entrance of the voting location. Oftentimes, vote centers and polling places will be in libraries, churches, schools, government facilities. These are buildings that have many addresses, or excuse me, many entrances. And it's important to make sure that the voters are directed to the primary entrance to the voting location, and that those directional signs are abundant, that they're large, and that they clearly indicate the path to the entrance to the polling place or the vote center. Another thing we're looking for as we transition from the parking area to the entrance of the vote center is physical accessibility. Is it easy for someone to navigate the curbs, the sidewalks? How far is it if one were to walk from the parking location, in particular from accessible parking to the entrance to the polling place? Is it 100 feet, 100 yards? Those do make big differences to many voters. We also look, especially here in Southern California, for the availability of curbside voting. That's a very important option for many voters who may not be able to physically access the vote center or the polling location. We're always checking to make sure that there are curbside voting signs that are in the parking area, that those signs are near accessible parking, that they're legible, and that the instructions for how to access the curbside voting option are easy to see. We're also looking for the other required signage that is necessary at the exterior and interior of polling places. Now, of course, this is state and jurisdiction specific. Different locations, different areas are going to have different kinds of required signage and posted information. So we always want to check with the election officials and be aware of what the rules and particular issues and requirements are in their area. But the two important things that we're always looking for in general are signs that indicate where it is possible to engage in election-related activities and where it's not possible to engage in election-related activities. This is usually called electioneering. In most jurisdictions that we've been to, electioneering is prohibited in the voting location itself, but is allowed a certain distance outside of the entrance to the location. So we want to make sure that those signs are outside the polling place or vote center, that they're easy to see, and that they help people who do want to engage in those activities to know what's allowed and what's not. We also want to see other important voting information posted both on the exterior and interior of the polling place and vote center. Especially information about important voting rights, instructions on how to use the voting system, and other issues that are required by the locality and the state. Next, when we enter the polling place or vote center, there's a lot of issues about the physical location that we're on the lookout for. The first is to just stand and look and watch how voters move through the location. Typically what we want to see is we want to see a clear path for voters to navigate through the check-in process to access a ballot marking device or a ballot booth or a voting machine, to the place where they check out, either scanning their ballots or simply getting their vote here sticker. So we like to see that they get their I voted sticker. We like to see that there's a good, consistent, and clear flow path for voters through the facility. We don't like to see situations where voters are crossing back and having to go in kind of very odd patterns through a polling location, because that can be confusing and it can just wreak havoc with the operations of a vote center or polling location. Another big thing that we're looking at is how the polling place or vote center is laid out. In particular, is it laid out in a way that allows voters to have privacy when they're using the voting system, when they're marking their ballot, or when they're using a ballot marking device. This is a very, very important issue that is often overlooked. In many locations, the polling place or voting center is perhaps in a small building. There's not a lot of physical space. And so the ballot marking devices, the ballot booths themselves might be located in a way where it's easy for election officials who are working in the area, for other voters, or for other individuals who are in the polling place or vote center to observe the act of voting. So we like to try to see that there is an attempt to allow voters to have more privacy when they cast their vote, and that the vote center or polling place is laid out in a way that tries to maximize the privacy of voters. Finally, we're always looking at issues related to the security of materials and equipment. We want to make sure that ballot boxes and blank ballots and important election material are always secure, that they're always in close proximity of poll workers or election officials in the vote center or polling place. We want to make sure that when we have the opportunity to closely look at ballot boxes and voting machines, that they're secure, that they're sealed, that the seals are in place, and just general security issues about all ballot materials and equipment. Again, this is an issue that's jurisdiction specific. So before we go into a location, we like to get a better sense for what the processes are for, again, handling incoming ballots that a voter may have received in the mail, the provisional voting process, and also the process of marking a ballot. So we need to understand that before we go in and start looking at the security of that process. But again, these questions about the security are very, very important. Another thing we're always interested in are the people who work at the polling place and vote center. We can never forget that there are people who are spending a long day working in these locations. It is not an easy job. It is a complicated job. It's a people facing kind of position. And, we want to make sure that, the folks who are there seem to be well trained. They seem to be engaging with their customers, the voters, in positive and productive ways. And that the general environment in the polling place and vote center location seems to be a positive one. Most of the time, we'll walk into a vote center or a polling place, introduce ourselves, and there'll be a good feel, a good vibe. The people who are working there are getting along. They're having a good time. Things seem to be going well. They're engaging in positive ways with voters. But sometimes we'll walk into a polling place or vote center, and that is not the case. And usually that is a red flag for us, that there's something that we need to pay attention to try to figure out, if we can, what is the issue and why the folks who are working there are not having a good experience. Finally, when we're done with all this, our job is to provide productive feedback first to the jurisdiction. So, for example, if there is an immediate pressing problem that we notice, the first step is to always contact the county election official for the county we're in, or other officials in the state or in the jurisdiction, to try to give them immediate feedback if there is need for that. More generally, what we typically do almost immediately after an election, if we've engaged in a kind of a significant process of going around to lots of polling places or vote centers, we like to write a short memo that describes what we have done and try to get that in the hands of the local election official as quickly as we can, to give them feedback about what we have done and what we have found and what we have seen, in particular before we make any of that information available to the public. Despite our best efforts, there are some times where we simply do not understand the processes of a particular jurisdiction as well as we should. We do sometimes make mistakes and misinterpretations, and so it's good to give that information to the jurisdiction so they can help us learn and make sure that we are providing correct information and good positive feedback to this jurisdiction as a result of the work that we've been doing. Only after we've engaged in that process, where we've let the jurisdiction know what we have found, what we're thinking about their operations, do we ever make those kind of reports available to the public. And finally, I'll reiterate this again. The overriding goal here is for us to learn about how a vote center or polling place is functioning, For me to teach that to the students who are with me, or to the guests who may come along on a particular tour of vote centers or polling places. And so again, we need to make sure that when we're engaged in these kind of research activities or educational activities, that we're respectful, remembering that these are places where democracy is happening. These are places where people are trying to exercise their right to vote, their hard-earned right to vote, and that we need to be respectful of that, and that we need to always remember that we're guests. So thank you for listening. I hope this gives you a sense for how, in general, we engage in our election day and early voting, in-person observation activities of vote centers and polling places. Thank you.